So good morning again to everyone who is based in North or South America, and good afternoon to all of you that are joining us today from our old continent, Europe. My name is Victoria, and I am one of the two regional coordinators of EURAXESS Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome to our third webinar in the series of How to Get Published, which is a joint initiative of Taylor and Francis and EURAXESS North America and Latin America and the Caribbean. Today, we will focus on the topic of post-publication amplification. In other words, how to promote your work. This session will provide useful information to help authors promote their published research and increase the visibility and impact of their work. Our speaker and expert on the topic today is Luc Antieul, who is the Director of Marketing for Researchers at Taylor and Francis. Luc specializes on open access journals at Taylor and Francis and has 6 years experience with the company supporting authors and researchers to find the right journal for their research. Before giving the floor to Luc, let me briefly introduce EURAXESS, especially to those of you who have not heard of that or not very familiar with this initiative. EURAXESS, Researchers in Motion, as its motto indicates, is an initiative dedicated to support researchers' mobility within Europe and from outside Europe to Europe. EURAXESS doesn't fund mobility, but we help you find funding for your research stay in Europe. EURAXESS is present in 42 European countries and 8 global hubs. Our main tool is our website, which you can see on the screen. You can search our database of jobs and funding, offering thousands of vacancies per day. Browse through the Career Development tab to find out what might be your next career move. Discover the Partnering tool, which allows the registered users to look for researchers and research institutions for their projects in Europe and abroad. Once you find a position in Europe, the EURAXESS European centers will help you with all the practical and administrative issues you might face when moving to a new country. Last but not least, you will find the global hubs under the EURAXESS Worldwide tab, including EURAXESS North America and Latin America and the Caribbean, where you can connect with us in your regions. You can also see the Login Register button for those who would like to create a profile on our website and receive, for example, notifications about newly published jobs or funding in your field. Also, keep in mind that all our services that we offer are free of charge. You can follow us on social media. Here you can see where we are present. And of course, you can always send us an email with your questions or concerns. We'll be happy to be your first contact with the European research area. And just to finish my presentation and present a little bit my colleagues that you can see on the screen, in North America, my colleagues Jackson and Deria are there to assist you. And here in Latin America and Caribbean, my colleagues Charlotte, Daniel, and myself are here to help you with your questions. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to our speaker, Luc, for his presentation. Thank you very much, Luc, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for that lovely introduction. And good morning, everyone, I should say. I think a lot of you are either in North or South America, so it's very much your morning. It's a lovely sunny afternoon here in Oxford in the UK where I am, so I hope you're getting some of that good hot weather as well. And yeah, absolutely lovely to be with you all today. So thank you again for inviting me to talk to you about this topic. This is a hugely important topic and a topic that's front and center of a lot of the minds of researchers at the moment and only will increase in future years to come as well. So my name is Luc Antieul. I'm at Taylor and Francis, where I work in the marketing team. I've been, as Victoria said, with the business for about 6 or 7 years now. I'm going to talk to you for about an hour today around this topic of how you can increase the visibility of your research and the impact that your research has. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping. I think might be mentioned already that you can add questions to the chat box as we go through the webinar, and we'll come to those at the end and answer as many of those as we can. And also to try and make this next hour as engaging and interesting as possible for you all, that we're going to drop out the presentation on a couple of occasions, one right at the beginning actually, so quite soon, to do some live polling using a tool called Mentimeter, which some of you will have used already, maybe in similar sessions and presentations. I'll talk to you a lot more about that at the time and what you need to do, but all I would say at this stage is just to have another window open on your browser or have another device nearby, just because you'll need it to get into the poll without webinar at that point. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? We'll start by just introducing the topic a little bit and talking about why it really matters for authors to share their research. We'll then have a bit of time to look at some of the main channels that are available to you to really share and amplify your research. Lots and lots are available, and we'll talk in detail through a number of them. And we'll do a really deep dive on press releases and media promotion, and also social media promotion as well, as two very different channels, but very, very crucial channels that you'll potentially be wanting to think about. Then the last section of the presentation for me will really look at the resources and the training that's out there and available for you, both from publishers like Taylor and Francis, institutions, and other places as well. And then finally, we'll, as I mentioned, have some time at the end for questions and any discussion that we might want to have as well. So to set a bit of a scene here, when I think about the challenges researchers face at the moment when it comes to promoting your research, I really think about this as both a huge opportunity and a huge challenge. In the year 2021, it's never been easier than it is now to create content. There are a whole range of tools available at your fingertips to instantly promote the papers you publish. So many of those tools are cheap, they're really quick to implement, and they allow you to reach global communities of large pools of authors and potential readers very, very quickly. It becomes even easier as well if your work has been published, say, open access, in an open access journal, which is freely available for anyone to read anywhere. Because obviously then a major barrier to authors or researchers reading your research article has been removed. However, alongside that opportunity, there is a huge challenge as well. So more and more articles are being published, more articles than ever before were published last year in 2020. And the online world is awash with engaging content fighting for our attention. So I think there was some research a couple of years ago that showed that the average reader online scrolling through a social media site or looking over a website has an attention span of approximately 8 seconds. So that is 8 seconds that you have as an author of a paper who you want to put out into the world and bring to a wider audience. Those 8 seconds are basically the sum of the time you have to engage people. So your promotion needs to have a really clear hook. And even want to engage people and get them to maybe click through and look at your paper or poster or whatever it is you're trying to promote, there's no guarantee at all that they're going to properly engage with it and digest all of the information within your research. And this as well is against the backdrop of funders, institutions, universities demanding more and more impact from the research they support. So as I said right at the beginning, authors are being asked increasingly to find ways to promote their work. And therefore, you as researchers need lots of support to do this. And there's a big role, I think, for us as publishers to play here as the people who help you publish your work, to then help you promote it after it's been published, and lots of other people as well, the academics who advise you, the editors who edit the journal you publish in. All of these people can be a huge source of support and help to help you navigate what is quite a big challenge. Okay, so I promised you some live polling, and I'm pleased to say we're going to do that right at the beginning to kick off. So to start with, I want you to think about the different groups of people you're trying to reach when you promote your research. So who are the audiences you're trying to tap into when we talk about promoting the work that you're publishing? So these audiences can really be as broad or as specific as you like. There's no right or wrong answers here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called Menti, as I said, so that's menti.com. And if you can get there on a device or open a separate browser window, and then when you get there, it's going to ask you for a code, an 8-digit code, which is 87213751, and it's on the screen right there now. And then when you put in that code, it will show you the web page, and it will basically ask you the question that we've got on the screen there. which group of researchers trying to reach when you promote your research. You can then start to add your answers, and it will pop up in a word cloud that we can all have a look at, and we can all see those answers come in. Now, just to say as well, this is all completely anonymous, so I don't know who's saying what, and you won't have to add any personal data or anything like that. It's completely anonymous and really just for this moment right now. But just to help us all think about the different groups we're trying to reach when we promote our research, if I could ask you just to go to that site there and add that code, then I'm going to come out of a presentation, and if the technology works correctly, we will hopefully start to see some answers coming in, and we can see lots of answers coming in, which is good. So as I said, this is a word cloud, so the more of you who say a particular word, the bigger that word will be in the middle of the cloud there. And you can really see lots of different answers coming in, which is great to see. So peers in the middle is obviously the most popular one. So typically other researchers, other academics, and we can see those are groups that are highlighted themselves as well, but very much academic stakeholders there. I'm seeing, which is always good to see, lots of science, lots of subject groups coming up as well. I keep moving around, so I can see geophysicists there. I saw a few others, but they keep moving. Cell biologists are there as well. So there's a few specific subject areas and subject communities that you're trying to tap into. These are coming in, I think, the quickest I've ever seen them today, so I'm struggling to keep up with them all, which is excellent. Industry, always good to see industry recognised there, but sort of commercial stakeholders, you might call them, pharma companies, industry, engineering firms, all of the companies and organisations that need access to your research to help them make decisions. I like, someone said families, that's always a nice one. I always appreciate people who point out that their families are very interested in the research they're doing, so well done whoever said that. Journalists, yep, we'll talk about media as I mentioned later on, so good to see recognition of media and journalists there. Just seeing what other different groups we've had. I can see general public, so again we'll talk a lot about the general public in a few minutes and the importance of engaging with them and also the challenges of that, so good to see that being highlighted there. I'm just going to see if there's anyone else. Policymakers is down there on the bottom right, or that's flying around the screen. Yes, policymakers, really, really crucial one. So typically governments, people who can actually take your research where it can have real world benefit, and then create laws, legislation, policies that can then actually give that research a real world impact and improve people's lives. Well, I was going to say I think they're slowing down. They're still coming in thick and fast, which is great to see. But I think those are the key themes. With apologies to anyone who's I've missed and whose contributions I've not called out specifically there. But I think there's a lot of yeah. I think we've picked out the key themes there, which is great to see. Okay, I am going to then come back out of this. There is actually one group. I'm just seeing if you have got or not. I'm just trying to quickly scope through, but it's difficult. So I apologise if it is there. The one I think that might be missing, and it's probably tied up, I think, in some of your minds around other researchers and some of the academic stakeholders, is students. So students, I don't know if they explicitly mentioned it, but that's sometimes a group that I see mentioned in this presentation that I can't quite see explicitly called out there. But they are typically a slightly different audience to some of those actually doing research themselves, but there are still a key group of people who you want to read your research. Okay, I'm going to come out of that one now and go back into the presentation. So, our next section looks at why does it matter. So if those are the groups of people we're trying to reach, why is it important that we do it? I think a lot of these reasons will be quite well known to you already, or certainly some of you, so apologies if I'm telling you things that are fairly obvious here. But obviously the first point, and probably the biggest point, is the one at the top there, around ensuring research is being discovered by your peers, and by that we really mean other researchers. The scientific process, as you all know, relies upon scientists building upon the meaningful breakthroughs of other scientists and researchers, and therefore to do that you need to make sure that your research is in front of those people and getting taken forward in that way, so it can be built upon and taken forward. Through that, we can really then deliver value to your institution and research funder. So we talked a little bit already about how those groups are particularly asking researchers more and more about the impact of their research, because it in turn delivers value back to those bodies for the research they're funding and the work you're carrying out. From a personal point of view, obviously promoting your research and building your own profile really helps your own career development, as you'd imagine. And that in turn helps you to justify the value of your research. So to really pitch for future grants, future promotions, and future projects that you might want to work on within your subject area. It's really important to support dissemination of research to non-academic stakeholders, so policymakers and the general public. And actually, it's really reassuring and good to see that those were two groups you picked up yourselves in the activity a minute ago as groups that you're looking to target. And also, finally, from a point of view of a publisher, from the point of view of a journal editor and an editorial board, you promoting your research really helps to develop the journal as well. And that can really help journals establish themselves as a really leading place for conversation in your subject area, and in turn helps them to attract more high quality research like yours into that journal as well. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the non-academic stakeholders in the next couple of slides. My reason for doing that is because most of the time when I do these presentations, you know your peers, you know what it's like to be a researcher in those research communities quite well. The non-academic stakeholders are a little bit more of a mystery in how we reach into those. So that's going to be the focus for the next couple of slides. So one of the big pushes on researchers at the moment is around the real world impact of their research and really cutting through to the general public. And we've talked a little bit about that on a couple of occasions already. So it's really worth thinking about, I think, the context that researchers are working within here. And what I mean by that is, how engaged are the general public currently? Do they want to know more about the research you're doing? And when we think about the coronavirus crisis that we've all lived through, obviously, over the last year or so, questions like that are really crucial, because we need to understand how much the public understand about the information they're being fed, and the really important information that's coming from governments and scientists. But also we need to know that the public are going to trust that advice and follow it and listen to it. So therefore these questions and the attitudes the general public has to science really is important to think about. So in 2018, Wellcome, who are a big funding body based in the United Kingdom, but operating globally, surveyed over 140,000 people in more than 140 countries to find out about their attitudes to science. It was one of the largest science engagement studies ever done. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I've listed 5 percentage values, and on the right-hand side, there are 5 statements. And as you probably guessed, what I would like you to do is have a go at matching the percentage value on the left to the statement on the right. Now, there's no poll this time, nothing for you to do on Menti or online, but it'd be really good if you just on a piece of paper in front of you or in your head, you could just have a go at matching up which of those statements you think that the number matches up to. So to run through them all for you, we have A, which is 70%, B, which is 23%, C is 62%, D is 53%, and E is 14%. And the statements are, number 1, that they want to learn more about science. Number 2, that they have low levels of trust in scientists. Number 3, the percentage of people that feel that the work scientists do benefits people like them. Number 4, people who say they did not learn about science in school. And number 5 is the percentage of 15 to 29-year-olds who say they know some or a lot about science. So I'll just give you a few seconds just to have a go at matching those up, and then we will flip over to the next slide and look at the answers. Okay, I'm going to move on. So you're going to see the answers flash up right now. Okay, so here we are. Here's how those match up. So A matches up to number 3. So 70% feel that the work scientists do benefits people like them. B matches up to number 4. 23% of people say they did not learn about science in school. C matches up to number 1. 62% say they want to learn more about science. D matches up to number 5. 53% of 15 to 29-year-olds say they already know some or a lot about science. And E matches up to number 2. 14% of people have low levels of trust in scientists. So I should say straight away that, of course, there is huge global variation in those answers, as you'd expect, and that particularly rings true around levels of education and trust in scientists that people may have. But for the purposes of a discussion today, I think that the 62% figure is really interesting. So that's option C and number 1. Because those are 62% of people who say they want to learn more about science. So those are members of a public who are really engaged, and they present a huge opportunity for authors who can cut through and take their research that might be relevant to those audiences and really engage and educate the general public. I mentioned that there's some data and some variation within the global data. I know that we've got a lot of people on the call today from all over the world, but particularly North and South America. This slide here then gives you the data from the USA and how that breaks down a little bit more specifically in this country. I apologise for not having it for every country separately in North and South America, but I hope you'll understand we'd be here well until the night if we did. But it is all available on the Welcome Global Monitor report, which you can see listed there if you want to go away and have a look at how this data looks in your own particular country. But just look at this US data then as an example of one of the countries within the region. You can see, say, that 87% of people say they learned about science in secondary school, which means 13% didn't, which is comfortably below the global average we saw on the last slide. And then in the younger age category, as we typically see, that figure is even higher at 94% of people saying they've learned about science at secondary school. Only 25% of people say they have high trust in science, but again, this figure is slightly higher in the younger age group. But this juxtaposes really in the US with the 83% of people in the graph on the right-hand side here who say that they feel science benefits people like them. So I believe that insight like this is, oops, I've scrolled forward a little bit, is really important whether you're living in the US or not. In the US specifically, it shows that an educated population who largely see the benefit of science and the research and how it brings benefit to their lives. And although other countries might have slightly different stories and slightly different data, it will hopefully show you the opportunity that really exists wherever you are in the world to take your research to the wider population and really think about how you can package the work you've done, find the hook that's going to engage people, and hopefully take it to that wider public. Okay, so that's a little bit on the why is it important. So the next section of the presentation today is really going to dig into the how. So we're going to talk a lot here about the tools and the channels that are available to you and go a little bit technical on some of them. So to introduce this section, I wanted to give you the view of an author. This is an author called Russell Warne, who published with Taylor and Francis in one of our education journals. I think it was about 5 years ago now, so a little while ago. And he published his article with us in the Journal of Educational Research. It was very popular. Russell did lots and lots of work to promote his article. We worked with him on a press release for the article. We did some promotion on social media. He wrote about his article for the Education Week blog. And he also created a video abstract and an infographic to also sit alongside his article on our journal homepage. So all relatively simple tools that, that he and we as a publisher could follow to promote that work. The article has been downloaded over 2,200 times. It reached over 30,000 people on social media, and it featured in a whole range of media sites relevant to the subject area. So for instance, blogs, and I think The Conversation as well, which is a news and analysis site. And Russell gave us this quote, which I always include in these presentations because I think it's really helpful to sort of hear this direct from a researcher who's done this work. He said that publicising an article is work, but it's really worth it. I have received more emails about my article in the past 2 months than I have about all my other work in the previous year. Another university has invited me to visit because of my work, and my students are more excited about research because they see the attention it is getting. Not every article I write will be as interesting to the public, but I will definitely be working to do what I can to rustle up some interest in my work in the future. And I think that's really interesting. I think the bit that sticks out most from that quote for me is where he says that not every article I write will be as interesting to the public. Because I think this is one of the challenges you have as a researcher when you've just published a piece of work and you're thinking about how to promote it, is really you have to think about the groups of people who are most likely to engage with your article, be it policymakers, be it other academics, be it the wider public, and then choose your channels and your tools accordingly to help you best reach those people. So what you can see on the slide here is quite a long list of channels that are a fairly exhausted list of channels that are available to you to promote your research to others, be it academics or general public or policymakers, etc. I'll talk through these quickly. We're going to go into more detail on some of them, as I said. So firstly, repositories. Lots of you will have repositories linked to your university or your institution where you can just upload a version of your paper in there, and it can be freely available then for everyone in your institution to read. And also there are lots of subject repositories as well. And you'll see preprint servers listed a couple of lines down, as well as another way where you can deposit an early version of your article freely available for people to read. Conferences, absolutely massive one, maybe less so at the moment with fewer in-person events, but even at the moment virtually conferences present a big opportunity, particularly to reach academic stakeholders in particular. Teaching and workshops, we've talked a little bit about students and the opportunities they provide, but obviously you have huge opportunities through your teaching to take your research, put it on reading lists, talk about it in seminars, and really take it to audiences who are learning your subject through those forums. Media and press releases we're going to talk a bit more about. Videos and multimedia, it's quite daunting often being asked to create a video, and I mentioned that Russell worked on a video abstract for his article, but it's also incredibly easy. Smartphones, laptops, tablets, all of them will have cameras built into them now. You can sit down, you can record a video talking about your research, a couple of minutes and you'll be done. And it can be a really, really engaging way of just telling people what you've done and taking your research beyond the words on the paper that you've produced at the end of it. Blogs and websites. Some of you may have a blog. If not, you'll almost certainly be aware of blogs within your subject area, or key people within your subject area who do have a blog. You can either choose to write on your own or write on someone else's to talk about your research and really start to join conversation and build conversation around your work. Email is a remarkably simple way of promoting your research. Taylor & Francis and pretty much every other major publisher gives authors a number of tokens to give people free access to your article if it is published in a subscription journal. If your article is published open access, then you don't need to worry and you can share it as widely as possible. But essentially what those tokens do is just provide you with a unique link that you can share out to a number of your contacts or colleagues and give them a link to read your paper. And that is so useful in such a simple way of just messaging the people in your network, the researchers who you think are most interested in your research, and say, look, I've just published this new paper. You can read it completely free here and completely with no access barrier. Please go ahead and do it and let me know what you think. And that's just a great way of getting your research out amongst your peers. Social media, I'm sure everyone uses social media in one form or another. If you don't, you've done very well to avoid it. We'll talk a little bit more about social media later. Policy briefings, particularly important for policymakers and governments. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about those in a couple of slides' time. And then lastly, podcasts. The world at the moment seems awash with podcasts. We're seeing so many popping up all over the place. Taylor & Francis ourselves have a series of podcasts, which I'll tell you about at the end. But a really, really good way of, again, either joining an established podcast if there is one in your subject area to talk about your research, or you could just record your own audio file as an episode and put that up in a similar way to sharing a video. So not all of those channels will be available to all of you. Some of them might be completely off limits for one reason or another, but a good number of them are. And the important thing is that you don't have to be using all of those. The more you use, the better in most cases. But the key thing is that you're aware that different channels help you reach different groups and present different opportunities for you. But there's one other channel that I haven't mentioned there that is actually probably, I don't know if this is fair or not, but it's certainly close to, if not probably, the most important channel of them all. And that is SEO, which is search engine optimization, for anyone who's not aware of the acronym. And I really can't put into words how crucial a first step SEO is when you think about your article. Because this is the bit you do before you even publish your article. This is what you do when you are writing up your research, you're getting your article ready to submit to a journal. You will be subconsciously titling your article, putting keywords into your article, maybe without thinking it, maybe consciously, actively thinking about it. but all of this really, really impacts the search engine optimization for your article and how findable it's going to be for other researchers. So there are 6 tips around the chart in the middle of the screen there to hopefully give you some tools to do SEO really well. The first one is all around keywords and identifying keywords. So when you are writing your research and when you're writing your article, you need to think about and identify the relevant keywords for your article. So what you need to do here is think about the search terms that someone would need to use to find your article. Almost imagine someone sitting down, logging onto Google. What would they search for if they wanted to find your article? And there's a tool called Google Trend, obviously linked to Google, which can actually tell you how many times a particular keyword or phrase has been searched for. So if you're in your mind thinking there's a few different keywords that you might use, but you don't know which one could be the most popular, you can look at Google Trends and it'll actually give you that information and help you pick the most important keyword or the keyword likely to generate the most traffic. Once you've highlighted and chosen your keyword, you need to then write your article title. And what you want to do is include one of your keywords or phrases right as close to the start of your article title as you can. That's because Google Scholar, which is obviously one of the major search engines for indexing academic article, indexes more heavily the first 65 characters of a title. So actually the more keywords and phrases that are in the start of your article title, the more likely it is that your article will be found and indexed by Google Scholar. Obviously, you're going to potentially have quite a few keywords and key phrases, too many to include in your title, given that you probably also want to keep it quite short and snappy. So that's where your abstract really comes in. And it's obviously really important to include keywords and phrases in your abstract, as they will be indexed in the same way as your title. But given that you've got many more characters available there and you can have a longer period of text, you can also bring in alternative keywords and synonyms there as well to help you include other terms as well that you feel people might search for. You'll have headings within your paper, so search engines do index headings within academic articles. So again, including keywords and headings, as you probably would anyway, is a fairly useful way to improve your article's indexing. And then the last 2 are a little bit around when your article has been published, how you can help its SEO then at that point once it's actually online. So search engines really, really rank highly on inbound links. So the more links there are to an article or web page around the web, the more highly they perform in terms of search engine optimization. So including links to your article on web pages, on blogs, on social media channels, these are all indexed by search engines and a really good way to help boost your article's position in the search ranking. And then finally, citations. Now, this one comes with a bit of a caveat in that, on the whole, citing your own work is obviously not especially good practice and not something we'd typically recommend, certainly heavily. But the flip of that is that actually, the more an article is cited, the better it does perform from an SEO point of view. So there is a benefit to doing it. The really, really clear advice from me here is never cite your own work where it's not relevant, obviously, but absolutely, if you have carried out a previous study and it is very relevant to the study you're doing now, then it is fine to obviously cite it within that study, and that will add extra weight in terms of SEO benefit both to your old paper and the new paper you're publishing to. Okay, so that's SEO. I promised you we'd talk a little bit about policy, and again, I was pleased to see that this was one of the key topics and groups that you identified as you wanted to reach when we talked about the groups you want to reach when you promote your research. So when we talk about influencing policy, what we're largely talking about is getting your research in front of people who can take your research and make decisions that hopefully will improve society. So these tend to be linked to governments, tend to be linked to parliament and government, and really policymakers themselves rely on short, snappy policy briefs that give them new, reliable and accessible knowledge that they can then take forward. I'll be very honest straight away that this is one of the more time-intensive areas for a researcher, and also it will only be relevant for specific types of research that are likely to have an impact on policy. So as an example here, education research is always really, really has a really high potential for influencing policy, as you can imagine, because as we research in the field of education, there's lots of potential for governments and education bodies to take that forward then and actually turn that into real world practice. A lot of the focus here is really on networking. So you really need to understand who the key policymakers are, the timelines for the policy development, and you need to get yourself known by those people and those decision makers. So one of the things you can do to help you, as we've mentioned, is to create a policy brief. A policy brief is a really short summary of your research paper, normally about a side of A4, maybe 2 at the most, outlining the key outcomes from your research that can affect policymakers. It does need to be very concise, it needs to be very snappy and understandable. And you might also talk a little bit about how the current or proposed policy approach is failing, and actually how the research that you've done presents a better option. Your journal editor or your academic supervisor or other academics you work with might be able to help you in this area if they are well connected and know contacts and you feel you may not. Or you may also have your own network of contacts you can tap into ready to go. Conferences are a great way to meet potential policymakers and similar people to working in your subject area. We at Taylor & Francis have produced 2 guides. You can see them both on the screen there as sort of infographic style guides that are available online. And these are specifically designed around supporting researchers who want to get their research in either the European Parliament or the UK Parliament. Now, these guides are very applicable to basically, I think, any parliament around the world, which will work in a very similar way. And actually, the tools and the tips that are listed here, I think, could be relevant to you, as I say, whichever you're trying to do. So well worth going away and having a look at this if you feel that actually research you have done potentially has real impact and potential to impact policy. And there's lots of information here around why it's important, the routes into those parliaments, and then the top tips to make connections and ultimately make sure you're successful. So well worth doing that. You can also go to our author services site, which I'll link you to at the end, and there's information about writing a policy brief and some examples of those as well, if that's of interest. And in conferences, I always feel a little bit funny at the moment talking about conferences because obviously for lots of people around the world, going off to in-person conferences is just not something we're doing at the moment. But I very much hope that there is a time soon when we will be. And actually, as a researcher, conferences do present one of the biggest opportunities to you in terms of growing your profile and presenting your research, particularly to those academic audiences. So here are just a few tips and tricks. Some of these do translate very well where you're going to virtual conferences at the moment. Some of them maybe not so much. My first bit of advice would always be to arrange meetings in advance. So typically conferences, when you get there, as many of you I think will know, are very busy. People book themselves up quickly, and it's always hard to get people actually on the day. So try and get time in the diary with key people who you want to reach out to, be it policymakers, be it other academics, potential collaborators, as soon as you can before the conference. Obviously look for sessions that are relevant to your research. If you're early enough, you may be able to ask if you can present your paper or sit on the panel. If not, at the very least, you can go along to that session, ask a question, talk about your research in that forum, if you feel able to. Social media is such an important tool around conferences, both before, during and after. Before, you can obviously use social media to research what's happening at the conference, look at the hashtag, during doing the same things as well, following sessions, joining conversations, and then afterwards as well, sharing potential links to your research, giving people access where they might not have it already. And then finally, I'm sure many of you will have done this already, but to present your research in a poster session is a really powerful way of presenting a simple, short, snappy version of your research for your peers to look over quickly. You should always have a 2 to 3 minute elevator pitch prepared to briefly outline the key findings of your research. And always, I think it's good advice to not include too much text on your poster. Really think about the design, think about making it as accessible as possible for people who will only look at it for 30 seconds, a minute, maybe 2 minutes, to take as much as they possibly can from that. And always include a link to your article and direct researchers really clearly to where they can go to find out more, and hopefully then take that away and read the fuller version of your article that you've written. Okay, I hope that all makes sense so far. And please do come back with any questions around any of those channels at the end if you have any. I promised you a bit more of a deeper dive on press releases and social media. So that's what we're going to cover now for the next few minutes. So yeah, we'll go in and look at the press releases and media promotion first. So there's no doubt really that using a press campaign to get a research article into the media can really help your article boost the impact it achieves. It's a particularly useful tool if you want to reach readers beyond the research community. It can really make the biggest difference in taking your research beyond that academic audience to a more general, a wider public. Obviously, the benefits for you include an increase in downloads, citations, the opportunities to reach audiences who might not otherwise have been exposed to your research, and it can also obviously provide a significant boost to your own career and increase exposure for your institution and research funder. So everyone goes home happy when this is done well. The infographic here shows one example of a campaign that was run by the TNF press team. There were lots of good results from this. I think there were 45 news features, and those are just the ones we know about. There were 20,000 downloads for the article, and actually it presented the author with a really good platform, even a year after the press release was sent out, to continually talk about their work and strike up collaborations with new people within their field. So you've just published a paper, you feel like it might be relevant for a press campaign. What are the key things you need to think about? Firstly, you want to start by thinking about whether press is the right channel. So it's really time consuming to run a press campaign. It's probably one of the harder things to do. And you really need to be able to dedicate time and effort to maximize the chance of achieving positive results. When the release goes live, so you'll often work with a press officer, either within the publisher, Taylor & Francis, or potentially within your institution to write the release and get it to the point where it goes live. But once that happens, there's work for you to do around hopefully speaking to journalists, making yourself available to be interviewed on television shows, on radio programs, depending on how wide the reach is. And even beforehand, the journalist might come to you with questions as well to ask you about your research and to really help them write the article that they're writing. So you need to really think about whether your research has a clear message. So journalists receive hundreds of press releases a day, so your research really needs to stand head and shoulders above this noise. It needs to have a really clear headline, which is easy to communicate. And a good rule of thumb here is that if you struggle to explain your article to someone outside of your discipline, it's probably likely that it'll be too complex for a press campaign. And then finally, you need to think about the impact your article is likely to receive. So scientist is always not easy to understand for a lay audience, and sometimes the miscommunication of research can be really damaging, both for your own personal profile, if you like, but obviously also for the wider society as well. So it's really important to think about how easy it is to communicate your research, how clearly it can be communicated. And this is something that any press officer you work with will always be thinking about as well. And certainly at Taylor & Francis, we will only take forward a press campaign if we think it's likely that the campaign will have a positive impact overall. So that note of caution taken into consideration, what are the types of research that tend to make the news, and how can you best decide whether to pursue press promotion for your article? So there's sort of four main factors here. The first is that the research will involve a major discovery. So this always is of huge interest to the press, as you can imagine. The one caveat though is that it needs to be a major discovery in a field that people can relate to, and people need to be able to understand the impact it has on their life. And that ties into the second point around the impact on society. So how does the research affect everyday life, and what does it mean for the average person? Putting people at the centre of a story is really important to journalists, and that's what they'll look for when they decide whether they run ultimately with a media campaign or not. Research that tends to do well tends to have a clear recommendation for a change in practice. So here is something that's broken, and here is what my research is suggesting we can do differently. Often, to actually drive long-term change, there is a lot of lobbying needed beyond just one press campaign, but it can really help position your research as a driver for that and help have impact through that campaign. And finally, it needs to be timely. So it should really add something of value to the current media narrative. So at the moment, coronavirus is the obvious example, and we're doing a lot of media releases as we publish more and more research on coronavirus, because we know that it aligns with the research and the articles that journalists are looking to write. And again, your media office and your press officer will help you identify if it's timely and hold it back for a timely moment if we feel it's not yet timely. A few things to avoid. Firstly, published research. So it's a major disadvantage, I'm afraid, if your research is already published, purely because journalists like to cover breaking news. So we typically won't launch press campaigns for research that is already published, but before research publishes, we will often hold it under embargo, let an editor or a journalist see it, so that they can start to write their article, and then hold back the article until the date that the article is published, to really help you have the maximum impact. Sometimes, I'm afraid, your research might hold lots of wider interest, but it just doesn't offer anything novel for journalists to cover, and that can be quite challenging to pitch to the media. Some examples of that could be things like literature reviews, which already cover research in the public domain, or if the research is in a really niche area or subject area. And that could be a niche subject area, which obviously has quite a narrow pool of interest, or also in a niche geographical region. And that lies into sample size as well. So the campaigns, the press campaigns that do well, tend to be quite broad samples that have covered quite a large portion of the globe in lots of cases. Smaller sample sizes tend to be a little bit of a cloth to journalists. Although if it's a very regional study, then there are obviously regional news agencies or regional organisations who will help you take that story forward if it impacts a particular country but not of wider interest around the world. And then finally, having no one available to talk and answer questions is a big disadvantage for journalists. So you really want to make sure you've got someone close to the research who can talk to you about it. So if you'd like to find out more about promoting your research, there's a wealth of different resources available online. I would recommend you visit our Taylor and Francis Author Services site, where there's a whole host of information about carrying out media campaigns, and also our press nomination form, where if you're publishing an article with us and your article is about to be published, you can fill out that form, let our media team know, and they will work with you to decide if that article is likely to have good impact in the press, and then run a media campaign if they feel it is. Away from us as publishers, there's also media centres, so Science Media Centre, the Educational Media Centre. Lots of countries will have their own media centres who can offer really clear regional guidance on how to help you take your article through a press campaign. And then finally, your own institution will most likely have a press office. Not all of these do, but they will also be able to offer normally informal advice on how to potentially take your research out. And also answer quick questions or give you practice in how to handle media interviews as they come up. And then finally, at the bottom there's a email address for our Taylor and Francis media team, who would always be happy to answer any questions you have on media releases and media campaigns. Okay, so the last channel I want to dig into a little bit is social media. And to start with, really think about why bother with social media, why use it to promote your research. And the answer I always give to this question is actually the one you can see here from the founder of Altmetric, which is a article sort of metric service for those of you who aren't aware. And they said that people are really going to tweet and blog about your article no matter what. The conversation is happening with or without you. So use social media and take the opportunity to really engage with interested audiences. There are though some values, some positives and some risks to doing it. We would always argue that the value hugely outweighs the risk, but I'll talk you through sort of both to give you a fairer analysis of all the situation. So firstly, as we've already said, the audience is there already in lots of spaces. Most subject areas will have a community somewhere on social media, be it on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, on blogs, or somewhere else. There will be somewhere where people in your subject area are gathering. And obviously social media offers real-time interaction with people. in a way that meetings and other forums where you might email them or contact them don't quite offer that real-time interaction. As someone who's posting through social media, you can benefit from a huge wealth of useful data to really help you understand who's engaging with your posts, what messaging is going down well, and therefore test and learn very, very quickly to help you make your messaging as impactful and your reach as broad as possible. And it obviously really helps your personal brand building, and we've talked a bit about that in lots of these different examples today. But really good social media promotion, being a really active member of the conversation within your subject area, can really help benefit your personal profile and brand. The downsides are that tracking return on investment can be difficult, so it's hard sometimes to know the difference between a like on Facebook and a download of your article and even a citation of your article and how those two marry up together. You do need to spend quite a lot of time on it to do it well. Many researchers are worried about trolling, as I think most people on social media are, full stop, and that is a common fear which we'll talk about in a minute. There's a feeling that you might make a mess of things, that you might say the wrong thing, you might misrepresent something and obviously then do damage which is much more longer term, given that there's a sort of permanency to social media that doesn't necessarily exist with things you might just say in conversation. And finally, linked to that, the feeling of not really owning it. Obviously, these social sites are owned by social media companies, and therefore you are putting the message out into the world through channels and forums that you neither own nor completely control. 3 key points to remember when you're thinking about rolling out promotion across social media. The thumbs down represents that you don't need to be everywhere doing everything. One of the biggest errors and mistakes we see is researchers who think they want to promote their article on social media will then just go and post out the same content. They might even take their article abstract and just post it out through every channel they can think of. And really, that's not the right way to do it. What you really want to do is think about where your audience are, be it Twitter, be it Facebook, be it LinkedIn. You want to join those communities, you want to engage with them, and then you want to put out really sort of thoughtful content that's got a clear hook and that they're likely to read and engage with. What works really well on social media obviously are graphics, videos, images. Tends to work a lot better than written words, as you can imagine, particularly when we talk about the short attention span people have. Social media really allows you to share a valuable expert voice. So with so much information and misinformation out there, this is really important. So don't ever lose sight of the fact that no one knows your research as well as you do. Feel free to make sure you do position yourself as the expert that you are and have the confidence to really talk about your research and join the conversation in the forum that you're in. And then finally, don't try to communicate your research in too much detail. So I just gave the example of an abstract. What you really want to do is use your research as an olive branch to lead people on to more detailed findings and discussion. So a few lines of text, key information and findings from your research article, or as I say, a graphic, an infographic, a graph, whatever you have that you think is a clear hook that can engage people about your research will often be far better than a big block of text that people will struggle to read and engage with in those forums. So yes, I think some tips here. Again, I've talked through these already, so I won't go into too much detail on those, but really know your audience, think about who you want to reach and where they are. Think about what you want to achieve overall. So what is your objective? Do you want to join a conversation? Do you want to drive downloads and readership of your articles? Different things will lead you to do different things on social media. Choose your social platform accordingly. Don't try and do them all. Some are much better at certain things for others. For instance, Facebook and LinkedIn are far more sort of conversational, and particularly the LinkedIn groups and communities on LinkedIn are more conversational, more longer term permanent groups to be involved with, whereas Twitter is a bit more in the moment, shorter, snappier conversations that you won't typically look back on and continue for months and months on end. Really think about the quality of the post you're creating. As I say, make it short, snappy, but also compelling. Get to the hook of your research, think about what that is, and make sure that's out there and resonating with the audience that you've identified. And then finally, make sure it's a two-way street. It should be a conversation. It shouldn't just be you pushing information out there. You want people to come back with questions, with ideas for how you can build on your research, really make it a social experience to do it well and make it as engaging as possible. A couple of useful resources here. The one on the left is a guide we did with the Science Media Centre. I think about a year or so ago we launched this, which is all around advice for researchers who are experiencing harassment online. It's a really, really fantastic guide for anyone who does have a fear of trolling, of saying the wrong thing, of being harassed on social sites. There's lots of advice in there from how to hopefully avoid situations like that ever arising to what to do if you do find them taking place, and you find yourself stuck in a conversation or a situation which is a bit more difficult and you're worried about it. So lots of advice in there. Please do go away and look at that if that is a particular concern you have, and something that you want to read up more on. And then also our Author Services site has lots of information about social media and how you can do it well, including this podcast series on skills that we see that researchers need for the future, that was co-produced with Vitae, who are a body of researchers in Europe. Okay, so this is the final section of the presentation now, you'll be pleased to hear. So the last section, we're just going to look at just a few more resources, tools, training, tips that you can find at your fingertips. So I'm going to just quickly go back into Menti, and I promised you one more bit of live polling, which I'm just going to set up for you now, so that's there. Oh, sorry, I don't know. Okay, I think some of you have seen this question already, which is good, but it looks like it's coming through already, so that's even better. Or you've all been very quick and got there super quickly, which is good. So the second question I wanted to ask you in this part of the presentation was for the reasons that researchers feel unequipped to participate in public engagement. Now again, Wellcome did a survey a couple of years ago where they asked researchers for exactly that question. What are the barriers? What are the blockers that are getting in your way? And in a minute, I'm going to show you the actual answers people gave. But I was going to ask you at this point to go into Menti and have a go at answering that question. So if you haven't yet done that, you should be able to go to Menti and you'll see a questionnaire and you can answer it now. You'll see that it's not going to come up as a word cloud this time. It will just add everyone's responses one by one. But for those of you who have, it looks like a number of you have obviously been able to see that already and answer that, which is brilliant. So we'll start looking through some of these answers and give a few more seconds for anyone who wants to add any more as we go. If you do need to add yours still, then menti.com, and the code there is 87213751. So we'll have a look at some of these answers coming in, and we'll try and look at the themes here. So difficult to simplify research. So I guess again, particularly for lay audiences and the wider public. Policy and procedure, we've got procedure listed down there as well. Less subject knowledge, apprehension, why me attitude. I think there's 3 slightly different points there, but all very relevant. You may think your results and findings are inadequate. I hear that one a lot. Actually, people say, I just don't feel my research is that groundbreaking. And that's fine. Maybe it's not in this instance. And as we said, some of those channels may not therefore be relevant, but lots of them will still be. And actually, you can learn a lot, and other researchers can benefit a lot from results which you think may not be particularly groundbreaking or different from what's out there. Not applicable in day-to-day life, particularly the case when we think about those audiences who are general public. Again, scientific vocabulary is inaccessible, inexperience, time-consuming. I don't know if we've said time yet, but this is probably the major one that I hear again and again when I talk to researchers, that you just do not feel you have the time to do this and do it well. Hopefully I've shown you that actually there's so many channels out there, there will be some that are quick, easy and still impactful, where you do feel that time is a barrier. Lack of confidence, yeah, we'll talk about that one I think in a minute. Bureaucratic approach, yeah, we sometimes hear that as well. Sometimes people feel that it's not their place to promote it, or they're actively encouraged not to share their research too widely. I'm just going to see what else we've got here. Sorry if I start scrolling past yours, but just trying to pick out some different themes. Yeah, research done for publication's sake to get a PhD degree. Again, I think that lines up with the point earlier. Don't ever undervalue your research, no matter what it is you think you're doing, and even if you think you're publishing something that isn't groundbreaking, it will always have impact for someone, and someone will always read it. So you should be sharing it, even if it's through in a really tight network of people and not beyond that. It's always of interest to someone. Yeah, awkward questions, fear of public speaking. Yeah, we hear that one a lot. Just seeing what else. Just seeing if there's anything here particularly different. Lack of participation spacious. Hopefully we've shown you that there are plenty of options and there'll be something for everyone. Don't know how to play the game. Yeah, I think I can sort of see what you're saying there, but again, hopefully, you know, in some areas you will feel that there are certain things you have to do and certain things you have to say. In lots of other channels there aren't, and you really can just be yourself and pitch your research through tools like social media, through channels, through your own close networks, in any way you see fit really, and there really is no game to play there. Sorry, there's a lot here as you can see, so I'm just trying to pick out anything that we haven't got yet. Extrapolating to real life impact, yeah, ties into the points we were saying earlier about just not understanding where the hook is. And as I said, if you're not clear, a media a press manager or a media campaign person will always be able to help you work that out. Don't understand how conference works. Yeah, again, I guess until you've been to them, until you've partaken in them, you may not. Please do have a look at our Author Services website, because there's lots of information there to help you prepare for conferences, and also lots of other research bodies as well will have tips and tricks there to help you involve yourself. I think I'm going to come off there. Apologies if I've missed anyone. And I've missed any of your good points, but I'm just conscious of time and not wanting to go on for too long. But thank you. So I will now go back into the presentation and show you the actual results of the survey that Wellcome did. So these are the principal reasons that people gave, and I think we're going to find that you've picked up on all of these. So lack of training, lack of experience, lack of time, lack of confidence, feeling like you don't have the necessary skills, and just not knowing how to get involved at all. So it's worth saying that we can't fix every single one of those as a publisher, or even as you yourselves. There will be some things there that will come over time, and ultimately will always be difficult to fix. Like, for instance, always feeling like you've got enough time to do this and do it well. However, what we can hopefully do is provide you with training. Hopefully we can feel like we've given you the skills and the know-how to get involved and to really go and do this stuff with confidence. And on this slide here, I've listed out some of the key places where you can go for tools and training. So I've talked about our Author Services site a few times today. I apologise for that. I'm sounding a bit like a broken record, no doubt. But it is a really, really good place to find lots of information that can support you as a researcher. So there's a whole part of the website dedicated to post-publication support, featuring information across all the channels we've talked about today, and really supporting authors to go out and use those with confidence. Obviously I'm biased, but it really is a great place to go as a researcher to find out more about any aspect of publishing or promoting your research once you have published. Your institution will most likely offer support through their research office as well. I've mentioned media centres and press offices, but also their research offices as part of the library will often have support. This screenshot I think is taken from a institution in India, but again, many institutions around the world will have similar sites and places where you can go and find out how you can grow the impact of your research. YouTube, other academics have lots of tutorials out there. This one, the PhD Diaries, is a really fantastic series run by a researcher as she navigates the world of publishing. There's lots of other similar peer-to-peer channels as well that you could go and have a look at, but that's one really good one, and you might be aware of others. Funders, as I mentioned at the beginning, funders are typically asking researchers to do more and more of this work around promoting their research and proving the value of their research. So obviously the consequence of this is that they're more and more involved in helping you do it as well. Wellcome here have a whole section of their website around support for people who receive their grants, and there's even, I think, an online course that their researchers can complete. Other funders do similar things and doing more and more of this stuff as well, so do always ask your funder if you're not immediately sure as to the tools they might have to help you promote your research. Podcasts and webinars. So I mentioned that we have a podcast series called How Researchers Change the World. Again, I'm biased, but it's a really, really fantastic listen of key research that people have done, published with Taylor and Francis, has gone on to then have really big impact. And hearing firsthand from the researchers themselves as to how they did that project, what it showed them, and then what they learned afterwards to really grow their research profile and ensure their work has impact. And then finally, community blogs and forums. So this is an example of a biomechanics forum from an older journal community I used to work with. Really, really great forum this for biomechanics all over the world, talking to each other. You might have similar within your subject area that you'll be aware of, where you can go and ask for tips and also share your research. If not, lots of subject areas replace forums like this with social media sites as well. So there might be opportunities there. Learning programs. So I mentioned how research changed the world. I just wanted to signpost you to 2 learning programs that are within this area. And what these do is they provide learning programs for both early career researchers and mid-career researchers. There's 2 different ones depending on where you feel you are in your journey, really offering you training and support to grow your research profile and ensure that your research has impact. So these programs are completely free of charge. There's no cost of them at all, and they're delivered online with no face-to-face contact at all. So you can literally just sign up, download them, and then do them at your own pace as and when you wish to. But you'll receive them delivered into your inbox every week for 12 weeks, a different module each week. I really recommend having a look at them, even if you decide they're no interest and not something you want to pursue further. But that, you know, if you feel that this is an area you want to understand more, these programs could be really helpful to do so. And we receive really good feedback on these. There's a link there at the top of the screen, a bit.ly link /2MS-VQ-J7. And if you go to that site, it'll take you to the page you can see on the screen there to find out more about how research has changed the world learning programme. And then very finally for me, a last call for services, which, as I said, is a really, really fantastic site. I recommend you visit it if you've not been able to already. And you can see there the homepage, giving you every support and tool you need to help you through your publishing journey, whether it's choosing a journal at the beginning, drafting your article, through to publishing your article, going through peer review, and then ultimately having your article accepted and promoting your work. There's lots and lots of good advice there. And yeah, you please do use it if you would like to find out more, and the URL is on the site there. So that is everything from me. Thank you so much for staying with me, if indeed you still have, and I hope that was interesting, and I hope that covered everything you wanted to learn about why it's important to promote your research, and how it can really add value to your own profile by doing so. On the screen there, before we dive into questions, I've left my email address, so if anyone does want to reach out directly with any questions at all, I always love to hear from you, and would be happy to try and answer any further questions you have after the session. But otherwise, I think I'm handing over to Charlotte now, who is going to lead us through any questions that have come in already.
Thank you so much, Luke, for this very insightful and very detailed presentation of how our researchers can promote their work. And yes, you're correct. We are going to go into the Q&A session right now, answering all your questions that you have put into the part that says questions. So if you still have some of the doubts or some questions that you would like to raise, please do post them. And I will now hand over to my colleague Charlotte to read the questions, and let's get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Luke, for the great presentation. We have many comments from the audience saying how they enjoy it. I would like to start. This is the privilege of the moderators, right? But last year we had a webinar with a Brazilian, the head of human resources of European company doing research in Brazil. And she said that she uses a lot LinkedIn to recruit researchers. And I don't remember seeing recruiters among the terms in the first Mentimeters who the researchers published their work for. So do you have advices to reach out to recruiters, where to publish, how to address them?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I don't think I've in all the times I've done this session, I've actually ever seen recruiters mentioned as a group of people to reach out to. But you're absolutely right. I mean, they're very, very relevant to everyone. I think my only real advice would be that LinkedIn, to me, would strike me as the key channel that you would use for that. We typically see lots and lots of people using now LinkedIn to help them make professional connections, as you'd imagine, and I'm sure people looking to recruit researchers for the purpose you mentioned would be using it in exactly the same way. And really, from the work we do within TNF and the engagement we see with the outreach we do to researchers, we typically see more and more engagement coming through LinkedIn as a channel, and it is really becoming a channel of choice for researchers to use. So I think if you don't already have a profile there, I'd certainly recommend you get one. And if you obviously want one and you're happy with the idea of social media, and then really updating your profile, keeping it a really good record of where you are and what you're doing, and also listing out your publications, I'd imagine would be the principal ways that a recruiter would then find you and involve you in projects like that. But yeah.
And of course, you wouldn't publish your article, your research, but you can publish a summarize or an article or a wide public document, because recruiters are not researchers most of the time.
Exactly. Yeah, you know, share a link to your article, or you know, a lay summary, something that can help them go away and find out more if they want to. But if assuming they're just looking for a simple summary of what you're doing, just something that can, you know, a few lines that can give a really clear snippet on the recent research projects you've worked on and the key findings that have come from those.
Good, thank you. We had a question. You showed many promotion channels and went through all of them, but do you have statistical data on the effectiveness of all of them by sphere of research, by area of research?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding that question, it's asking me how do you measure the effectiveness of the work you've done for those channels, and how does it vary by subject area? Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So I suppose I didn't talk too much about it because it's very variant on the channel. So some of those channels you won't be able to measure at all, really. So it's very difficult to measure, say, the impact that might come from anything that happens face to face and conversations that happen there, because you don't know, you can't really track what people do after the moment. But obviously anything that's digital and online, you normally can measure. So you can see the engagement people have with a tweet. You can often see then the impact that will have on downloads and citations if people go through and ultimately do click on your article and engage with it in that way. How does it vary by subject area? I don't know if we've ever actually seen any strong variation. I suppose the subjects where we know there's greater real world impact, and we know that it tends to have a bigger societal impact, will often have higher engagement in some of those channels where we have wider engagement with the general public. But that's not to say that subject areas which are smaller or a bit more niche won't have that, because they absolutely can do. It just tends to happen in smaller, more distinct communities. One really good example of this is anyone who's a folklore researcher on the call here, so a very specific area of humanities research, or arts research, I should say. We see every week on Twitter a trend around Folklore Thursday, which is a really small community of people who have built up this trend on Twitter, talking on Thursday about their favourite pieces of folklore and their favourite bits of folklore research, and just taking it out to a much wider audience. So that's one example of a smaller research area having a really wide impact on social media and being able to track that impact and measure it going forwards as well.
Yeah, using the trend topics is very clever strategy also, right?
Absolutely.
Luke, you were talking about the conferences and how to connect researchers, but what connect industries and researchers? What is the best way to reach industry and work with them?
Yeah, again, more difficult. I mean, conferences are still a way to do that. Lots of industry contacts and practitioners will come to conferences, particularly in engineering, medicine, subject areas, areas where we have a strong industry base. I would say again the other way, and I feel I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record here, but LinkedIn is a really, really good way to do this. It's a really fantastic way to obviously search for contacts and people who are in your field, to search for key organisations and people who work within that organisation, and to do that. And then finally, I'm just wondering whether there's anything you can do working with publisher to get insight onto who is reading your journal article. So for instance, the publishers we have, as a publisher of your article and the publisher of your journal, we have quite a good idea of who is actually reading your content, not down to the individual level, but down to the organisation they could represent. So maybe a year or so after you've published your article, you can reach out to the journal editor or even directly to the publisher themselves and just say, I published with you a year ago. I'm really interested if you give me any information on the organisations who have read my article. And then you could then look and say, oh, actually, this particular company, I had lots of readership from that group. What can I do then to maybe try and connect with people from that organisation through LinkedIn, through other forums where you might have a way in to meet those people. And that can really give you good insight then to help you work out who is using your research and connections.
Thank you. We have a question from Anastasia, who's wondering if you noticed that Google Scholars show US published articles rather than those coming from European journals.
No, Anastasia, it's a very interesting question. Not something I've noticed hugely. I wonder whether it might be linked to the subject area and just sheer volume of research that comes out of the US. Obviously, as I said, it could also be linked to the fact that those articles are being more highly cited or more highly read. But otherwise, there's no major reason why they should. As far as I'm aware, there's no sort of location setting in Google will show research from a particular country over research from other countries. It's more that the research from that country is ticking other boxes in the algorithm in terms of citations, volume, or another metric that's meaning it's indexed more highly. So that might be the reason, but it's hard to say without a real in-depth understanding of Google's algorithm and what's driving that.
I will read you a question by Madeleine. From what she's seeing is that she has to learn how to use social media in a smart way, and maybe that means give no, sorry, I will do it again. Quoting Madeleine, I am seeing that we have to learn how to use social medias in a smart way, and maybe this means give a hint about our work there, for example on Instagram, but to ensure that the real traffic is directed to our website or wherever the research is published. Is that what you mean? And could you talk a little bit more about this relation, how to use social media effectively? You already talked about that, but where do they send people to?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Madeleine. That's a really good question. So my advice to you would always be to use your article as the end point for your promotion, because I'm assuming that in most cases what you want to do is have your research read and ultimately cited. Now, when you're promoting to members of the general public, they're not necessarily going to cite your research, unless they are also researching themselves, but they will still hopefully read it, digest it, and obviously the more it's read, the more likely it is that it will be found by other people as well. The only time I would say that you might want to do something different is if you feel your research is very, very technical and very complex and hard to understand, and therefore if you send someone to it who just doesn't know your subject area clearly, and they're going to take one look at your article and run a mile because it's just not something they're going to understand. I think there's two different things you could do in that scenario. One is that you could always write a sort of a real world summary, a plain language summary to go on your article homepage, and many publishers will offer that as a thing that you can do if you feel that there is a real technical knowledge needed to understand your article, but actually that shorter, simpler summary could make it more accessible. Or you could create something a bit different and direct your promotion there. So for instance, again, if you've got a blog, if you've got a website, if you've got somewhere online where you can write about your article and you can talk about it in a slightly different way to the scientific paper itself, so almost as if you were to talk about it for 3 minutes on a video but in written form, you could do something like that, and that could then be an alternative way to direct people to your find out more about your research if you think it's too technical and too heavy. But my advice would be typically that you always want to try and use the article itself, either on Taylor & Francis online or elsewhere, as the end goal for your promotion, because ultimately that's where you're going to have the greatest benefit from bringing the traffic.
Thank you. To answer some practical question, do a little bit of housekeeping. Yes, you will be able to watch the recording of this webinar afterwards. It will be published on EURAXESS North America and EURAXESS Latin America websites, as well as the PowerPoints that Luke shared. And you will receive a certificate automatically by email in the coming days. So Juan is wondering if ResearchGate is a good platform to promote research.
That's a tough question for me to answer, I think. The simple answer is that, yeah, I mean, ResearchGate is very, very popular with researchers, and it's very, very widely used. So I can't pretend otherwise and tell you otherwise. As a publisher, it's slightly harder for us to recommend ResearchGate as a platform for you to use due to some of the copyright challenges that exist there. But ultimately, you know, I think my basic advice for you is that you probably need to go where the audience is. And obviously, you know, we understand that a lot of people use ResearchGate and it's very popular. And, you know, therefore that many researchers will want to use it for that purpose. You do have to understand though that as a publisher, we are not in a position to endorse it per se, and it's not something right now that we feel we can endorse as a tool to use. I hope that's diplomatic enough while still giving you a bit more information to answer your question.
We have a question from Hussam who wants to know how to promote basic science, molecular machinery mechanism that has nothing to do with everyday life.
Yeah, I think then in that case, then you are looking to be a lot more specific with the tools and the channels you use. So what you probably may need to do there is think about the academic community you're going to reach. If you feel actually there's just no real world impact and it's just not going to cut through to the general public and the channels we've used to reach those, I would really think about the first starting point should always be, where are the people you're trying to reach? So are they at a conference that you can then join and engage with? Are they on a group on LinkedIn? Are they on a Twitter channel? Where are those people that you're trying to reach? And once you've identified that and almost write a list of where they are, you can then start to think about your approaches in each of those channels to get your name out there and get your research heard and seen. I'm trying to think of any specific examples I could think of where I've seen this done especially well. There are some researchers we've been working within Taylor & Francis lately in really technical areas of life sciences, where they've done some really fantastic infographics and visual versions of their article that we've worked with them on, for the exact aim of then they're not going to be used so much with the general public or anything like that, but with other researchers. And the thinking there is that even other researchers have a very narrow window to actually read and digest your article. So what these infographics or these visual summaries of these articles will do is just within a minutes explain what you've done and the key findings from it in quite a nice visual way. And then what they're doing with those, what these researchers then doing with those infographics is taking them and sharing them through their own social channels to their own audiences with lots of academics within them, and also through other forums as well. So, you know, we talked about a biomechanics forum there, or a LinkedIn community around, I don't know, cell biologists. There are lots of places where you can take information like that and share it with other researchers. And once you've really identified where they are, then thinking about ways to make that research snappy and engaging and interesting and just quick to digest for people who are very busy is, I think, the next part of the challenge to overcome.
Thank you. We have a question from Edna regarding sharing research with policymakers. And she was wondering, what would be your advice for projects where results are case specific? For example, social studies linked to a particular community. This is because she's interested in replicating a particular methodology in different environments. And of course, the results and insight would change. So what should she bring to policymakers?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's I mean, quite a specific question, that one, I think, and quite difficult to answer. I also don't know if, and obviously you talked about replication, I don't know if there's any confidentiality or sensitivity factors you need to worry about there. I know particularly when we talk about showing medical research, then that can be an issue and a barrier. But assuming that there aren't too many of those issues, what you really need to bring, as I mentioned, to policymakers, I think, is a really clear summary of what your research has found, and again, with as much detail as you feel able to give there, based around any issues that there might be around confidentiality and sensitivity of sharing that information, and then an approach and a really clear idea of how that can help the policy they're trying to develop. So, for instance, you're working on this policy at the moment, this draft policy is out for consultation. I've seen that actually my research contradicts a part of this, and actually you should be taking it in this direction. And here is the research and the findings I've done to found that. And if you can then present that in a really clear, coherent way to that policymaker, then that's going to be very impactful and really increase the chances of your research being taken forward and ultimately listened to.
Well, thanks a lot. I think that I will read you Sandra's comment now. That is a good resume of what was happening. She said, it was a great webinar. Thank you so much for that, and congratulations. I think this is the message that we want to share with you from the audience. Thanks a lot. I will give the floor back to Victoria now.
I would like to just show you that we have done already 3 webinars before. This was the 3rd one in the series of 5 under the topic how to get published. All of these webinars and the recordings of these webinars are available on the website that you can also see on the bottom of this slide, how to get published 2021. So if you have missed the previous 2, you will be able to look at the recordings for these previous webinars on the mentioned website. And as you can see, we have 2 more for you, upcoming ones. We will have a short sort of summer break in between today's webinar and the future ones. We will have one on peer reviewing training in September, and then the last one, the 5th one, on editor panel in October. The registration for both of these webinars are already available on our website. So if you wish, you can already register. So without further ado, I would like to thank again to Taylor and Francis, and in particular to Luke, for today's very, very good, insightful and detailed presentation. And obviously also thank to my colleagues in North America, Jackson and Deria, for helping us organize these webinars, and of course also my colleagues here in Latin America and the Caribbean. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.